Hello, and welcome to the first in our series on historic monarchs and whether they deserve the reputations that they get. And we're starting by running through the three Richards, starting today with Richard I, Richard the Lionheart. He is, of course, the epitome of the great English king. We've all seen him. He turns up at the end of every Robin Hood film to bless a wedding and congratulate the hero on being awful to his younger brother Prince John. The brave and chivalrous victor over Saladin, the crusader hero. His statue, which stands outside Parliament today, was originally commissioned to front the Great Exhibition. Standing triumphantly, it presented to the world a truly great English king, the high point of what an English monarch and an Englishman should be. Well, frankly, I beg to differ. For a king that is supposed to be all about the England, in his 10-year reign he spent less than 6 months in this country. He was much more interested in that stretch of territory to the south, that bit that is the eastern half of France. Almost 2 years prior to becoming king, he had taken the Crusader oath, and once he was King of England, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou, he set about fleecing his new realms in order to allow him to fulfil this oath. The King of Scotland was granted independence in exchange for 10,000 marks. The Bishop of Ely was charged £3,000 to keep his job. Keep his job, not get his job, keep it. Now, the Bank of England doesn't actually calculate inflation back that far, but based on inflation rates from 1209, some 20 years later, that equates to 6.25 million in today's money. I want you to take a moment to imagine any situation at any level where you have to cough up 6 million just to keep your job. He was said to have declared, "I would have sold London if I could just find a buyer," which doesn't sound like the pious patriot we've been raised to believe in. And then there's the legend of the great crusading hero, the warrior of God striding across the globe. Surely, having spent a year extracting crusade money from his people, he was going to put it to efficient use, removing Saladin from Jerusalem. Yeah? No. Within 2 months of departure, he was not in the Holy Lands. He wasn't even close. He was in Sicily, where he was using his Crusader army to secure his sister's inheritance, which took him the best part of 6 months. He finally left in April 1191, some 10 months after leaving England. And given that he's running so late, because Saladin at this point had been in Jerusalem for more than 4 years, you'd think that the crusade would be the top priority, wouldn't you? But after part of his fleet was wrecked on the coast of Cyprus, Richard found time to take issue with the way the survivors were treated, and so spent another 2 months invading Cyprus and deposing its king. He finally arrived in the Holy Lands in June 1191, a whole year after his departure. Wasn't a total loss though. He had Cyprus, which he later sold to the Knights Templar for a massive stack of cash. Remember, it's all about the crusade and the holiness. So now this rich man set about getting into the kingdom of heaven, except that's when he got ill. He was struck down with a disease very similar to scurvy. So while he assisted to some point in the taking of Acre, he did so whilst being carried on a stretcher beneath a silken quilt. So I think it's really unfair to actually credit him with the taking of Acre. And once he had that, being a good Plantagenet, he then managed to ruin everything by throwing the Duke of Austria's banner from the walls. Quarrelling led to the Duke abandoning the crusade. He was closely followed by King Philip of France, and this left Richard with one ally, the Count of Montferrat, who was mysteriously assassinated 8 days before Richard's nephew married his widow. Suspicious? I think so. The subsequent splits in the Crusader army just meant that no faction had enough strength to actually take Jerusalem from Saladin, which is what the crusade was all about in the first place. So they ended up retreating back to the coast, and in October they negotiated a peace deal with Saladin and turned back for home. So the whole point of Richard going on the Third Crusade was to remove Saladin from Jerusalem, and he just hadn't. His return home was no more successful either. On the way he was once again shipwrecked and fell into the captivity of Duke Leopold of Austria. You know, that Duke of Austria, the one he massively annoyed while on the crusade. As such, the Duke took the opportunity to hand him over to Henry VI, the Holy Roman Emperor, who was to keep him as a prisoner. Now, initially, he was treated with the respect due to a royal prisoner, but Richard's level of diplomacy soon put paid to that, and he was placed in Dürnstein Castle. And according to contemporary William of Newburgh, he was thrown in chains so heavy a horse would struggle to have moved them. The ransom was set at 150,000 marks, about £100,000 in silver. That's more than 3 times the actual income of England at the time. If England hadn't been drained of enough money by this time, it was about to get completely emptied, and then some. A tax was levied which amounted to 1/4 of the monies of every man, rich or poor, able to pay or not to pay this ransom. And this is where a lot of the Robin Hood legend and the Prince John reputation comes from. Both John and the King of France actually offered 80,000 marks if Henry would just keep him. But I think he wanted rid of him. After all, we did. But the ransom was paid, and Richard returned to England in 1194, a free man and a free monarch. He used this newfound freedom to immediately leave the country and begin a costly war with France, a war in which he would finally pay the ultimate price. While laying siege to Chalice, he was shot with a crossbow and the wound became infected. Dying from gangrene, he had the archer brought to him, where he pardoned him and gave him 100 shillings. 100 shillings of our money, I might add. And then he died. Now that seems like a chivalrous and honourable act, and maybe it was, but after his death the archer was flayed alive and hanged, so it appears that Richard's pardons didn't really command the respect that his reputation might suggest. For the 10 years of Richard's reign, he barely spent 6 months actually in England. He practically bankrupted the country with his pointless wars and failed military campaigns, and left a legacy that would help take his brother down with him. He should be best summed up by the words of late Victorian scholar William Stubbs, who described him as a bad son, a bad husband, a selfish ruler, and a vicious man. And I can't really argue with that. Thanks a lot for joining us. Bye-bye.